right, we're back on the Ringer NFL show. Diante, what do you got? What lesson did you learn?
I think that Green Bay really just stamped itself as a team that you have to consider to make the Super Bowl with how they played. And I think that this was the exact kind of game they needed to have coming off of the loss to Detroit last Thursday. And we talked about it in the preview show, right? This was going to be a variance game for both teams. We know that Geno Smith usually operates really well against the blitz, and Green Bay likes to get very creative up front on that end. And then on the opposite side, you know that Jordan Love wants to hunt for explosive plays, and Mike McDonald's entire defensive system is predicated on not allowing quarterbacks to get to that. And I just thought that Green Bay dominated both facets of that from start to finish. And I think that if you're a Seahawks fan, there's a lot of apologia you can get to, right? You get the Geno Smith injury in the third quarter that effectively ended the game from there because you knew Sam Howell wasn't going to give them a whole lot. But I just thought that Green Bay getting out to that fast start, being able to move the ball on the ground just enough to force Seattle to have to honor it. And then you got to see Jordan Love do what he does best, aggressively seeking out throws outside the numbers, taking those deep shots down the field when they're available. To me, this is the exact kind of football game that Green Bay wants to play. And I think that Steven said it best. If they saw Philadelphia again, I think they can beat Philly. I just think that maybe Detroit has their number a little bit on the other side of the ball because of what Ben Johnson can design in the running game and the play action game. But as long as Jordan Love can get the football, you should feel pretty good as a Packers fan that he can get you to the end zone.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I think for a while now in the NFC, I've been looking at these three teams, Lions, Packers, and Eagles. It's going to be one of those teams getting to the Super Bowl. Vikings fans, I understand you're playing well. You're 11-2. I don't quite put you in the same class, but I might look stupid about that down the road. But yeah, this Packers offense comes out against the Seahawks defense that had been on fire the last month, and 5 of the first 6 possessions, 2 touchdowns, 3 field goals there. And then their pass rush gets going as well. Ruiz, did they show you anything else tonight or just kind of an affirmation of what we've been seeing for most of the season?
I think it's mostly just an affirmation just because, Sam Howell comes into this game and like his numbers, I think that was.
You know what I was thinking when Sam Howell came in? I'm like, Ruiz is the happiest man in the world to see Sam Howell play like this.
Now, obviously didn't want to see Geno Smith go down with the injury, but I do think it was a good illustration of how flawed this offense is. Sam Howell's numbers, he averaged 0.26 yards per dropback.
Yuck.
Yeah. I think that's less than a foot per dropback. I think it's like about 9 inches per dropback, minus 0.79 EPA per dropback with a 10% success rate on the evening. Like 10%, wow. The offense couldn't move the ball at all without Geno Smith back there. And this has looked like a borderline top 10 offense all season long when he's back there, at least top 10 passing game. And it was maybe one of the worst performances we've seen from a quarterback, at least for a half, from Sam Howell in this one. But no, I think this performance is about Jordan Love and like just the heater he's been on. I think I called it like a month ago. That was one of my good calls of the season. I think on the midweek show, Sheil, I said, I just think Jordan Love's about to explode. Since week 11, he's 3rd in EPA per dropback. Only Josh Allen and Jared Goff are ahead of him.
Wow.
He's averaging 9.3 yards per dropback over that span. That's the highest in the NFL. And if you look at his overall numbers on the season, he's now reached his EPA average from last season, 0.12. That's what he averaged last year. He's averaging it this year, but his yards per dropback has increased by over a yard. His success rate has increased by 3 percentage points. He is big game hunting, but he's been more solid down to down than I think we've given him credit for, especially over the last month. And they're the only quarterbacks playing better than him right now, I think, are Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. That's the list. Maybe in Joe Burrow. I would put Joe Burrow in there, but that's the list. And Jordan Love isn't really turning the ball over as much as he was. And Joe Burrow even had 3 turnovers today. So maybe I would put Love ahead of him. But when you have a quarterback playing like this and you have a defense that's playing solid, I don't know how good they're going to be. I don't know if they're like a top 10 unit, but they're my favorite for the Super Bowl for a reason. It starts with number 10.
I don't want to be, not to jump in front of you here. I don't want to necessarily be anti-Geno because I do think that what Steven is saying about the comparison, at least if there was any narrative or conversation to be had about what Sam Howell could be within this offense versus Geno Smith, that was clearly put to bed today. But I will say, like, if you just look at Seattle's offense through 3 quarters, which is when Geno got hurt, And compared it to through 3/4 the rest of the year, it was the second lowest success rate of the season for them, the highest sack rate allowed for them, the worst EPA per dropback versus pressure for them this year. And I think that into the half, the interception that he threw was like a really big encapsulation, A, of the problems that this offense has when Geno is not, making magic for them. And then B, just what Green Bay seeks to do defensively. You have the drop pick when they went to like a rolled cover 2 where you clearly could tell that Geno just did not see the rotation happening at all, just flings the ball out there. It's a dropped interception. The very next play, I think it was a cover 0 pressure or a 5-man pressure where they're playing man, and Geno just heaves the ball out to the corner pylon. And it's funny, in watching those 2 throws, the first name I thought about was exactly who we talked about in the preview show, and it's Dak Prescott when he's chasing 2 scores. And it turns into, I got to make something happen. Right? Especially when you're taking pressure. And I think that that's reflective of, for all the things that we get, all the credit we gave Ryan Grubb over the last couple weeks when this offense got hot, especially finding things in the run game that work for them. The protection plan tonight, I thought, was one of the worst that they've had this year, at least one of the worst that they've had in a little while. They clearly had no answer for the mugged looks. They didn't have any answer for the simulated pressures and creepers that Green Bay threw at them on passing downs. I thought the offensive line looked about as bad as it has this year, or at least in a little while, last few weeks or so. But to me, I just think that Seattle's offense just kind of showed you who they are. And it's not that this is the only thing that they are, because we've seen what it was over the last 3-4 weeks where they were moving the ball really well when Geno is healthy. But that's more of a Geno thing than it ever was a Ryan Grubb thing. And I think the same thing existed with the last regime as well. And I'm just looking for what this team can do to try to lift the floor around him a little bit, because for averaging 5 yards per carry on the ground, and I thought that he was able to connect with DK Metcalf, so much of it didn't matter because they just didn't have a good enough plan to get themselves out of bad situations where they were in second and obvious and third and obvious passing situations.
I want to soft launch a take. Like, I know that the offensive tackle positions are seen as the most valuable, and they're the ones that get paid the most. But for my money, I feel like I would start building an offensive line around the interior. And I think Seattle is like the perfect illustration of that. I know their young tackles have been in and out of the lineup and have been inconsistent, but the main problem when you watch them play is pressure up the middle. When you have a quarterback who can move around and can make plays out of structure, but it's not something he like majors in, and he's not one of the best in the league. I think you need to have that solid pocket where he can kind of work the pocket, step up, slide if he has to. But when he can't do that, the offense just isn't viable at all. And I think it's the same problem that Dallas gets into. You made the Dak Prescott comparison when they fall into these games and they get pressure up the middle. Dak Prescott can't do anything about it. And I think that's what separates these like tier 2 quarterbacks from the elite guys, from the guys like Josh Allen, who's going to be good no matter what the environment is around him, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, but like a Dak Prescott, a Geno Smith, these like tier 2 guys, if they don't have protection or the offense just is flawed in some way, like they have a fatal flaw with the run game, then it's going to be hard for them to elevate that kind of roster. So I think there's like very obvious spots that Seattle could address in the offseason to kind of make things easier on Geno Smith, like Diante's talking about. But it's going to have to start with the interior of that offensive line. That's been the problem for the last 3 years, and it hasn't been addressed yet.
You flip it around and you look at Green Bay's offensive line on the interior, and that was a big part of why Jordan Love is able to attack aggressively down the field. I mean, I think, maybe it'll change as PFF continues to update it, but looking at True Media before we got on the show today, they only had 1 registered pressure, and it definitely felt like that watching the game for Green Bay's offensive line. I mean, we talked a lot about Leonard Williams being a difference maker. We talked a lot about that pass rush kind of starting to figure out who's going to play what role and how to maximize what they wanted to get out of their front 7 in terms of just applying pressure to quarterbacks. And there was none of that on Sunday night. And I think that that's a big credit to what Green Bay has done in terms of drafting and developing guys and taking that best 5 approach and being able to move guys around. You can definitely see the value of that in these kinds of games. And then on the other side, like Steven was saying, I think it's very revelatory if you're John Schneider and the Seahawks brass to be looking at a young team like that you probably are aspiring to get your roster to, and looking and saying that, like, it's not just landing tackles. It's about building an entire infrastructure, using the offensive line as a way to say, hey, this is how we build a healthy offensive infrastructure, as we're not going to allow ourselves to have weaknesses on the interior or just across the board. That's going to be a big thing for them going forward.
All right, take a break. We come back. We're going to move to the AFC and the wild card picture. Big game there today that put some things in place. We'll talk about it here in a moment.